Hey fellow soldiers, I am so glad that you are here today. Today we're going to be looking at a man and how he handled stress in his life. So stay tuned. Hey fellow soldiers, let's sharpen our swords together as we dive deep into scriptures. Today we're going to be looking at the book of Colossians. Colossians is in the New Testament. It has 4 chapters, and its author is Paul. You know, in last week's devotional, I talked about how Paul was going through a tremendous waiting period in his life. You know, he was in prison. In fact, he was on house arrest. He had committed a crime, and his crime was propagating the gospel of Christ, spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. He did not deserve to be in prison like the other prisoners, but nevertheless, he was there because of the Pharisees. You know, Paul is awaiting to see what the Emperor of Rome is going to rule on his case. He's going through a waiting period in his life. You know, during this time in his life, he didn't know how long his waiting period was going to be, and he didn't know what the outcome was going to be either. But now for us, 2,000 years later, as we read the book of Colossians, and as we know what happened, this was the final 2 years of his life. You know, the outcome for his trial, his case, was execution. So, you know, what a tremendous testimony for a man to be putting forth these letters for us to read. You know, it really shows what was deep inside his soul, his strong relationship with Jesus Christ. You know, these 4 letters that he wrote are deep spiritual truths that we as Christians 2,000 years later come back to. You know, as I'm reading these 4 letters, I am looking at 3 different questions. I'm looking at who initiated the letter. And the second question I'm looking at is, if Paul is responding, what is he responding to? That's going to tell me what the contents of that letter is. The third question I'm looking at is, I'm comparing the lengths of each of these letters. So today we're going to be looking at the first letter. This letter is to the Church of Colossae. This is the book of Colossians. You know, churches back in those days are very different than church today. You know, church today is, there's a building and we all go and worship God, right? Well, church back in those days, they didn't have church buildings, so they met in people's homes. And so when he is writing to the Church of Colossians, he is writing to people who met in someone's home, the Church of Colossae. You know, this letter is 4 chapters long, and this letter was Paul's response to a visit that he had while being on house arrest. He receives a visit from the leader of the Church of Colossae. His name is Epaphras. Epaphras comes and visits Paul. And the purpose of Epaphras' visit is twofold. He is giving an update of the Church of Colossae. He's giving Paul an update. He has given him the good news, and he's given him the bad news. The good news is that the Church of Colossae, the fruit was spreading. The gospel was bearing fruit, and it was spreading among the congregants of the Church of Colossae. The bad news is that there were false teachings starting to creep in within their congregants. These false teachings dealt with involving worshiping of angels, invoking spiritual powers. So that's what was going on with the Church of Colossae during that time. So, this visit is not, asking Paul how he's doing. It's not, concerned for Paul and what, he's going through in his life, because he's going through tremendous amounts of stress during this time. He doesn't know how long this waiting period's going to be. He doesn't know how it's going to end up for him. And I'm sure that he was thinking very ill of the Pharisees, and to combat those very ill thoughts he was feeling, because they're the ones that put him in prison, right? He combats that by being selfless. He combats that by thinking of others. He is concerned about the Church of Colossae. He is concerned about the false teachings that are creeping in to that Church of Colossae. And his concern is born in those 4 chapters. Colossians is a book that we turn to 2,000 years later to get direction from how we are to live our lives and to beware of false teachings. Paul is an amazing role model for us to look to in dealing with the stresses of life. He didn't have to do this. He could have been consumed with self-pity, bitterness, just very evil thoughts, bad thoughts concerning the Pharisees. But he's not. How does this letter get back to the Church of Colossae? I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Tychicus was a messenger that delivered from Paul, that delivered this letter to the Church of Colossae. This wasn't the only letter he delivered. He delivered 2 other letters in that same travel. And I'll get to those 2 other letters in the next 2 devotionals. But the next time that we go through stresses of life, let us think about Paul and how he handled his stress by thinking of others. That's my spiritual food for you to munch on the rest of the week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. I can't wait to see you next week.